Breaking news. The NBA's top newsbreaker is stepping away from covering the league. So what does Adrian Wojnarowski's retirement mean for Miami? We'll break it down on today's Locked On Heat.
You are Locked On Heat, your daily Miami Heat podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
All right, welcome to Locked On Heat, your everyday podcast on the Miami Heat. Whether you're tuning in on YouTube, Odyssey, or your favorite podcast app, thanks for making Locked On Heat your first listen every day. I'm Wes Goldberg, editor at allyoucanheat.com, here with David Ramil. Both of us are credentialed Heat media members, and the best way to support the show is to leave a 5-star rating and review on your podcast app. Make sure you hit that subscribe button on YouTube. If you're not subscribed right now to either of those platforms, do it now. Today's episode is sponsored by Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, use the code LOCKEDONNBA for $20 off your first purchase. Got a bunch of stuff to get to today. We'll talk about the Heat's new City Edition jerseys here in a minute, which I'm not the biggest fan of, but we'll talk about that here in a second. But we have huge breaking news in the NBA that we have to get to first. Adrian Wojnarowski has announced his retirement from journalism from the news-breaking game. We'll get to how this impacts the Heat in a moment. But first, let's read his announcement, which he posted on social media on Wednesday morning. In a tweet, he basically, and on Instagram, he says, quote, "I grew up the son of a factory worker 2 miles from ESPN's campus and only ever dreamed of making a living as a sports writer. 37 years ago, the Hartford Courant gave me the first byline, and I never stopped chasing the thrill of it all. This craft transformed my life, but I decided to retire from ESPN and the news industry. I understand the commitment required in my role, and it's an investment that I'm no longer driven to make. Time isn't an endless supply, and I want to spend mine in ways that are more personally meaningful. I leave with overwhelming gratitude for countless mentors and colleagues, subjects and stories, readers and viewers. No one has benefited more than me from the belief, trust, and generosity of others. The past 7 years at ESPN have been a particular privilege. I'm appreciative of the company's leadership, especially Jimmy Pitaro, Christian Douglas, blah, 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 blah. After all these years reporting on everyone's teams, I'm headed back to my own." And by my own team, he, of course, means St. Bonaventure, which is his college alma mater. And Woj has been very vocal about his support of the Bonnies and all these things over the years. And now he's going to be the general manager of their basketball program in all this NIL world. I'm not honestly sure with the stories you hear about NIL, it's going to be that much less stressful than reporting on breaking news. But it does feel like Woj's job was, I honestly can't imagine a more stressful job than what Woj has had over these last several years when he's just been the news breaking guy. I just imagine like this guy having to report in the middle of the night. Every time your phone goes off, you have to look at it in that moment because you know if you don't look at it right away, that Shams or somebody else is looking at their phone and they're going to tweet it first or whatever it's going to be. And his whole brand was being first with accurate news, not just being first with something, being first with accurate news. And it got to the point where if Woj tweeted it, it was so. It happened, right? There was no, maybe this isn't right. That was just red alarm. This is happening. Now react. I think that's a more stressful job than being president. I can't imagine a more stressful job than what Adrian Wojnarowski did. And just a matter of not sleeping and all these things. And so I understand him trying to step away.
It's funny. And I don't know if I've shared this story in particular before, but we've been so fortunate in the decade plus of covering the team. That's allowed us so many different opportunities to go to all these different events, from the NBA finals to being a part of the NBA bubble and being able to see at various all-star games and NBA events and everything else like that. We've seen a lot of things over the course of the past decade. And one thing that has always stood out to me is going to an all-star game in Charlotte, I believe, and going down for a scrimmage of some kind between international players, the Basketball Without Borders event, which is a major elbow-rubbing affair for the NBA Illuminati. You've got your general managers, you've got your insiders, and everything else like that. And going through an entrance at this random college off nowhere near the Charlotte city limits where this event was taking place, and going down a stairwell and seeing Shams Charania there with 2 phones in his hands and sitting on a stairwell in the dark, basically by himself. it looked so sad and miserable and just desperate, because you're like trying to find news. Like, again, you're checking one phone to get your news from whatever source you might be plugged into, to having to tweet it right away. So you're like basically copying and pasting between these
Do
two
you think
phones.
one of the phones was specifically for Twitter? Because from an efficiency standpoint, you're on the phone. It's hard to tweet while being on the phone. And obviously, if you're Shams, you're getting confidential information. You can't just go on speakerphone, because then somebody next to you could tweet it. I bet one phone is for Twitter, and it's like got whatever 6G, whatever, like the fastest possible connection. So it's connected to satellites all over the globe. And then the other phone is just for talking. I never thought about that.
Well, it had to have been something like
Yeah.
that, because again, the use of two phones like that was what really stood out to me, and it struck me right then that in no way, shape, or form was ever anything that I was interested in doing.
I am so with you. It is lucrative, right? Adrian Wojnarowski is a multimillionaire because of what he does. Shams Charania, by the way, as far as I know, he's still set to become a free agent. I don't think he's re-upped with Stadium. I'm not sure about his status at the Athletic right now. He's obviously the first guy ESPN calls, I would imagine. So he's about to get a pay, probably, I would assume, a major pay grade here, a pay bump here. But and then obviously the trickle down effect from that. But yeah, it's extremely lucrative. It's probably the most. It's one of the most lucrative things you could do in our business. I don't know that there's an amount of money that you could pay me to do it. And I mean that honestly. I mean that if you said, I will give you all of Wojnarowski's, I'll give you the Rolodex, I'll give you the whatever, I'll give you all the contacts. This is going to be your job for as long as he did it, 7 years at ESPN. And I'm going to give you what he made, which was, I think, like a couple $1 million a year, I think, or something, $5 million, whatever it was. I would have to at least think about it. It would not be an automatic yes for me. I might say I lean towards no. It's not worth it. At some point, it's just not worth it. And so credit to him for doing it as long as he's done it. But I've also, I remember just being in sales in my past life, and there was one company I worked for in the wine sales business where they said you have to have two phones. Here's your company phone. Here's your personal phone. We're not going to pay for your personal phone. We will pay for the company phone, whatever. And I was like, all right, cool, like whatever. I hated it. I hated having two phones. And that was just like in my 9-to-5 sales job. I can't imagine in a 24/7 news business having two phones. So there's this is, to me, the biggest transaction of the NBA offseason.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, no doubt, this is going to change the way, for better or for worse, and we can get into that here. It's going to change the way we consume the news, the breaking news. And maybe that feels strong because there's other people that do what Adrian Wojnarowski does or did. Nobody does it as well as Woj, and nobody was quite the avatar of the news transaction in the NBA the way that Woj was. It was nobody else, no other insider can claim this. If Woj tweeted it, it had happened. It was a done deal. It was never a question about whether or not there was a gray area or a mistake. When Woj tweeted it, he was in some ways sort of a mouthpiece of NBA transactions. It was like, there it goes. It's happening. And he's the first one it was told to. And that's how you found out news, was Woj's Twitter notifications, the Woj bombs.
Think about the vernacular of NBA Twitter and the Woj bomb. Like that, it's become leaked into almost mainstream language and used on ESPN and things of that sort. Like the idea that from out of nowhere, there's going to be something explosive that rocks the NBA world, whether it's a transaction, a trade, signing, something, and how it's like associated singularly with him. Like I've never seen anything like it. And you and I were talking before we started recording how like the markets change, and I keep thinking about the legendary story of the boy who put his thumb in a dike in order to prevent the water from leaking. But this was him creating a hole and then plugging and saying, look who's essential. I'm the one who is keeping you from dying with this flood.
Right.
He's the one who created this market of like, you have to follow every transaction. I follow notifications for a handful of people, Shams being one of them and Woj being another. And it's like, because 10 years ago when we started covering the league, there was no need for this. Like the announcement of LeBron's departure was a story written by Lee Jenkins of Sports Illustrated at the time. Obviously now he's with the Los Angeles Clippers, or the LA Clippers, I should say. But there was no breaking news about this. There was no market for this, and then start growing and growing.
And the market is what? Specifically, the market is, here's the news 30 seconds before the team's press release, or the team's now, I guess, tweet announcing it, followed by the full press release. Like, It seems a little silly, but it does, like, it's different when you have, and that's why I used the word avatar before. It's like, it's different when you have a
Right.
person associated with it, right? It's why Ronald
Yeah.
McDonald exists, is you need somebody associated with McDonald's, right? Like, you need a
Right.
face of the franchise, and Wojnarowski was the face of the transaction franchise in the NBA. And not to say that there can't be others. Like you said, I also have my Twitter notifications on for Shams. I have my notifications on for several other sort of insider types around the NBA. But Woj was such a force to be reckoned with, and there's going to be a void that all of these insider types now are going to rush to fill. And so,
Yeah.
just like any transaction goes, there's domino effects of all of it, and it'll be really interesting to kind of monitor what the industry version of this going forward. Wojnarowski makes $7 million a year as of
Wow.
2022. Would you do it for $7 million?
No, still wouldn't.
Still
Like,
wouldn't
it's not
either.
worth it. Like, what's the money gonna do? Like, I
Make you
don't think this
rich.
guy has an off. Yeah, but he doesn't have an off season. Like, I can't imagine being like, oh, let's go to Paris, and then like trying to climb the Eiffel Tower and be like, oh, I can't go up there because I don't know what the reception's like. I don't know if I'll have internet up there at
Right.
the very top. You know, it's like all these different aspects that you have to take into consideration because you need to have your phone almost surgically attached to your hand at any point in time. It doesn't feel
It's not
worth it.
worth
Again, these guys just seem so miserable. Like the few Shams, you know, he does his television things or his video things and he provides content that
But
way.
even during that,
But
he's
like,
on his phone while it's
yeah,
happening. You can't even
we
just
we've
do
been
a
there.
radio hit.
We've been there at the draft or at NBA functions like the finals, and it's like he's sitting there on
Summer
the
league.
panel.
Yeah.
Yeah, summer league. He's like sitting there, and then he like when the cameras are off, he just turns immediately and starts going on his phones. And then once he's back on
I'm
camera,
excited for Woj. He's going to get to do his like first yoga class where you have to put your phone in a locker in like 30 years.
oh, cold
Uh,
sweat breaks out. He's not going to know what to do.
Right, right. I would throw my phone in the ocean if I were Woj, and I would just like, I don't need this. Throwing it in the ocean for a year, no phone. Just go flip phone for a year, just for emergencies only if his family needs them, and just like I
How
would just
how
disconnect.
how soon before there's like breaking news of like a major transaction, and he gets like the rush of trying to like call an agent and find out and
And
confirm,
for
or
and
like
for
if you
and
see,
forget that it's not his job anymore.
yeah, yeah,
I mean, he's a general manager of a basketball team in the NIL world. Like he's going to be able to use his connections to
it's got to
still
be
sort
different
of
though. Oh yeah,
build the Bonaventure program. I guess that's for Locked On St. Bonaventure to figure out. But how does this impact the Miami Heat? Does it even matter in terms of how Heat news gets broken? We'll talk about that next here on Locked On Heat.
today's episode is brought to you by Game Time. Game Time and their new feature, Game Time Picks. That makes getting tickets for your favorite live events even easier because Game Time Picks filters out all the fluff to show you only the incredible deals that you need on great seats, so you don't have to waste time searching through thousands of tickets that can be stressful. You're not sure if you're getting the right seats. No. Game Time takes care of all that for you, and they've got so many different other features to take advantage of. You've got your all-in pricing, so you never have to worry about whether or not there's any kind of surprise fees at checkout. Everything is right up front. You'll get the total right away. You've got the seat views feature, so you can know exactly where you're going to be sitting if you're in a venue you're not familiar with, and their lowest price guarantee, or they'll credit you up to 110% of the difference. So take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use the code LOCKEDONNBA, and you get $20 off your first purchase. Terms do apply, but again, create an account and redeem the code LOCKEDONNBA, and you get $20 off. Download Game Time today. What time is it? It's game time. We'll be right back.
Thanks again for making Locked On Heat your first listen of the day. For your second listen, enjoy the Locked On NBA podcast. There's no offseason in the NBA, as evidenced by today's news. And Locked On NBA provides daily basketball analysis from national and local experts in 30 minutes or less. They're going to be talking about this Adrian Wojnarowski news on today's episode, so make sure you check it out over there. We'll debate whether or not the new Heat jerseys are any good in a second. But before we get to that, how does Woj's retirement impact the Miami Heat and how we consume specifically Heat-related news, breaking news on the Miami Heat front? I think there's idea, David, correct me if I'm wrong here. I think there's an idea sort of out there that Woj has no sources with the Miami Heat, that the Heat have been the one team sort of guarded against the Woj and Shams news breaking kind of cycle. And there have been obviously occasions where they break their own news via press release or whatever it might be. But I want to pull up Adrian Wojnarowski's Twitter feed here. for just a little bit. So for those on YouTube, they can obviously see. For those on audio, we'll just sort of read through a couple of these. But the last time Adrian Wojnarowski broke Heat news was actually this offseason, July 8th, when he reported that Haywood Highsmith was resigning. You can kind of go down the list here. He had Caleb Martin going to Philadelphia. I can't recall if he was first on all of these things, admittedly, but I mean he's on Alec Burks going to Miami. He was on he was on Caron Butler re-signing a new assistant coach contract. He was on the Terry Rozier stuff.
For me, famously, the tweet I remember the most from Woj was at the February trade deadline of the 18-19 season, where he announced that Dwayne Wade was returning via the Cleveland Cavaliers for a second-round pick. I think that never really conveyed, and they're sending Dwayne back home or something to that effect. And that was like, I remember, as so many of our listeners do, even in 2019, just kind of refreshing my Twitter feed all the time and trying to see the latest. And that was the big move. That was the acquisition. It didn't really move the needle much. It was one season after 41-41. It was kind of a lost year for this team. And they needed Dwayne back, and he did come back, and it was a great return for Dwayne. No, that was the 2017-18 season, because it was the second year. He signed a 2-year deal with Chicago. He was waived after the first year, joined Cleveland for half a season, and then joined Miami for the next half a season. So it was 17-18. Pardon me for misspeaking there. But that I remember that. And that was before the team announced it. So I don't know where his source was, probably on the Cleveland side. But I think there's some truth to the idea that he doesn't necessarily have as strong a source within the Heat organization, a team that's notoriously tight-lipped, especially when it comes to injuries and things of that sort. And we've talked about that before, because the draft was always evidence of that. It was like you would get to the first 15 picks, and he was always announcing those picks well before they were actually made. And then it was Miami's turn in the draft, and you're kind of looking on Twitter, and then nothing would come. And it was like, that kind of struck me at,
it's a good point.
Maybe he doesn't have the same sources within Miami that he does have elsewhere.
It was a little delayed on Khalil Ware this summer, but we still got it ahead of time. And then it was, what was it, Jaime, that we didn't know until they actually picked Jaime, or was it Nico?
Yeah, I think so.
I think it was
either. I think it was both, to be honest with you.
It could have been, yeah. I do think that there's truth to that. I think I know for a fact that the Heat are notoriously tight-lipped and secretive about not only who they're drafting, which is definitely the case. Like, Jaime didn't even know they were picking him until his name was called, basically moments before his name was called. But there's two sides at least to every NBA transaction, and so Wojnarowski was always plugged in, and he basically stopped saying sources like the last couple of years, and he would just tell you, this is the agent who told me, which I thought was always kind of fascinating and also pointless, but it did sort of speak to the fact that, okay, Woj's sources were the agents, not necessarily the teams, although certainly he has sources with teams across the league, but I don't think he necessarily had like a go-to source within the Miami Heat organization, because we never really got behind the scenes looks on anything Heat related before or after any sort of transaction. It was just sort of the story. The transaction was the transaction, and obviously Terry Rozier's deal, like when Woj broke that in January, that can come from the agent. So the one thing was that he got the Eric Spoelstra extension, the 8-year extension, $120 million. That to me struck me as interesting. Was that could have just been Spo's agent. I mean, that could have just been that, or it could have just been Heat PR trying to be like, hey, we just signed this guy. Like, that's one that obviously behooves the Heat to get out there. But I can't remember.
That was last summer, right?
It was January 9th. It was this year.
This year. Wow.
Yeah, it was in the middle of the season, remember? When he signed
trying
the
to think, like,
why deal.
Why, to what advantage would it have been to get that deal finalized, or just to show that amidst all the fluidity
post
of
Damian Lillard turmoil, like the whole, like, what's the future of the Heat? They locked up their guy.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Yeah, no, I think there's something to it. Like the Woj and Shams evolution really has changed the way we kind of digest news. But at the same time, I think it's also altered the NBA landscape to a certain degree. And it's not to, overspeak their value or anything like that, but we've seen them be mouthpieces for teams, and they can both be used as negotiating tools and as leverage in free agency and things of that sort.
And sorry to cut you off here, but for an example of exactly what you're talking about, people on YouTube can again see what I'm pointing at here. But Adrian Wojnarowski, July 1st, 2023, so last summer, front offices talking to Portland today. We're left with the impression that GM Joe Cronin is pursuing a star level package for Damian Lillard, and that Cronin plans to look well beyond the Miami Heat to find one. That is an instance where it's very clear Wojnarowski is talking directly to Joe Cronin, and that is what Cronin wants to get out there. Hey, we're not just going to look at the Miami Heat. And of course, we know how that ended up playing out. But that's an example of teams using Woj to conduct their business in the public sphere.
Could you go so far to theorize that without Adrian Wojnarowski, if he simply ceased to exist, that there was a world where maybe he couldn't have manipulated the system so much, and Miami might have been able to acquire Dame without Woj meddling in affairs?
I've seen that out there. I've seen that out there. I've seen Heat fans be like, well, if Woj just retired last year, then maybe the Heat have Damian Lillard. I don't buy that. I don't buy that. That whole thing was being conducted in secret anyway.
Without Miami's participation too.
Didn't even know. And the fact that Drew Holiday didn't know he was getting traded until the Woj bomb came out speaks to that, right? And so I think Woj helped Joe Cronin. I don't think he's the reason why Damian Lillard isn't in Miami, right? Like those two things can be separate, like they can be exclusive of each other. And I think Woj actually helped Joe Cronin more after the fact with the big long story about how Cronin was so secretive about this with his notebook and all these things. And so I think he kind of helped Cronin help massage sort of the idea around him not doing right by his star player in Damian Lillard. I think that was more of a public massaging than anything else, but not necessarily directing Damian Lillard to Milwaukee. And I already know a lot of Heat fans are going to yell and disagree with me. Think whatever you want. I mean, there's no way to prove it. If you want to argue it, you go ahead.
He's always spoken highly of the Heat organization, despite whatever perceived or real lack of a connection or a clear
there's almost
source
like a respect about it. Yeah,
absolutely. Speaking of Pat Riley and the organization, when they made their finals run, like everything they've done in terms of like free agency and things of that sort, there was an absolute level of respect, or at least that's how I perceived it. And you're right, fans will be defensive on behalf of their team, and I totally get that they'll act indignantly on behalf of the Miami Heat front office, but until they turn on them themselves, but that's a whole other story. At the same time, I just think there's always been like an appreciation for Woj, or at least that's how I perceived it.
I have one more point on this in terms of how this will actually change the way the Heat front office conducts its own business. I got one more point on that. Plus, the Heat's new City Edition jerseys were revealed this week. But what hints can we glean from next season's City Edition jersey? We'll talk about all of that here on Locked On Heat.
Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. You've heard us talk a lot about FanDuel, especially with the NFL season ramping up and America's #1 sportsbook. That's why you've got to be following them right now. Well, we've got something a little different for you, because now through September 22nd, all FanDuel customers can bet just $5, just $5. That's almost a cup of coffee nowadays. And you get a 3-week free trial of NFL Sunday Ticket for YouTube and YouTube TV. The news coming out this week that Tua will be placed on injured reserve, so he'll miss at least 4 weeks for the Miami Dolphins. And so if you don't, if you're not a big believer in Miami's backup quarterback, and there's no reason why you should be, and you want to check out some other NFL action, then this is the deal for you. With a YouTube TV base plan, you'll be able to watch every regular season Sunday afternoon out of market game, and all you need is a Google account and a current form of payment, and you can cancel at any time. That's great. Just visit FanDuel.com and download America's #1 sportsbook today. We'll be right back.
Thanks again for making Locked On Heat your first listen every day. If you're new to us on YouTube, hit that subscribe button. The best way to support the show is to follow us on your favorite podcast app. Leave a 5-star rating and review. Before we get to the City Edition jerseys, David, just one last thing on how this impacts Woj's retirement, how it impacts the way that the Heat even conduct their business, because it goes more than just how NBA fans consume NBA news. Right. The thing about Woj and Shams and these newsbreaker types is that they also are connected to these front offices, and they can help, right? Like front offices get deals done, right? There's
grease the wheels,
and you talk to a lot of people like one front office. Let's say that the Memphis Grizzlies GM. I'm just throwing out an example here, totally hypothetical, but let's say the Grizzlies call Woj and say, hey, you know what? What's up with Brandon Ingram? Like, what do you think the Pelicans want for Brandon Ingram? What have you heard from the Pelicans side in terms of what they'd be demanding, right? And then you can kind of get that information from Woj before you start negotiating. It's information gathering before negotiations, right? And so it's guys like Woj become very useful to front offices, and that's, by the way, why you get sort of the return favor of, well, you give me this information, we'll tell you if and when we actually get a deal done, you'll be the one to break it. And so that's how Woj kind of builds his network. I never really got the sense that the Heat did that with Woj. And the reason for that is that Pat Riley has been in the NBA forever. And and by the way, so has Andy Ellisberg. So have Adam Simon. So have the Arisons. So has Eric Spoelstra.
Yeah.
The Heat's because their front office has been so stable and they've been together so long, they don't really need somebody to put the two tomato soup cans together, right? They just call up any front office and say, "Hey, I'm Pat Riley. You're gonna take my call," and you can kind of just, and it's not even just that, but it's also like shooting straight kind of thing. And I think they can get information other ways. By the way, the Heat's front office has, maybe more importantly, connections with agents across the league that they don't need necessarily Adrian Wojnarowski to be connected to those agents, where a new GM, like Joe Cronin, for instance, a first-time general manager, might not have the Rolodex of every agent in the NBA the way that somebody like Pat Riley does, who's been dealing with every agent in the league for 20 plus years, right? And one agent retires and they connect them to the protege and whatever. And Pat Riley just has these connections. Andy Ellisberg, Adam Simon, they have all these connections. So that was just one thing. I don't think that this is going to impact the way Miami does business. But I'll tell you this: there are front offices across the league that are looking at this and being like, "Dang, what are we going to do
now?"
Yeah,
Right.
yeah, and not so extreme like we can't make any deals anymore. But it's like, all right, this makes things a little bit more difficult for us.
One less tool in the toolbox.
Correct.
Yeah.
Well said. Yep.
What was I going to? Oh, I was going to say something because it was just, how much longer do you think that metaphor of the tomato soup cans on a string is applicable in today's culture?
I think I'm stretching it now.
I
was a little afraid.
100%.
Yeah.
This is like, we're talking 80 years ago since, I guess kids in the Bowery were like,
So I don't
probably.
understand. How do you text through a string? I don't get it. Like, how do you Snapchat through a string? How do you TikTok through a string? Doesn't make any sense.
Yeah, there were no apps on those tomato soup cans. I think that's a big part of it. Yeah, you can't download anything that way.
That's a really good. There were no apps on tomato soup cans. That's great analysis. Let's go ahead and move on. The Miami Heat revealed their new City Edition jerseys this week. They are continuing along with the Heat culture theme. Of course, remember last year's City Edition jersey was the black Heat culture jersey. That also coincided with the in-season tournament, revealing like the painted red court and the whole thing. But hey, this is the campaign. Just like Vice, they're going to do a couple of years of this. Maybe, perhaps, David, more than a couple of years in this. Before we get to what that means, the red Heat culture jersey, your thoughts?
I'm in a minority. I like them, but I was in a minority last year, and I like them too. And so, I think it's solid. I know that the idea is that they're boring and everything else like that, but perhaps my own style being what it might be, I don't necessarily tend to lean towards bright and garish or busy or anything like that. And so when I see these, simple as they are, I think they're clean. I think they look nice. I think they're solid, and I don't mind. I know it kind of shows maybe a lack of immense creativity because it's basically just the inverse of last year's jersey. You're switching black and red, and that's okay. Not every year has to be a Vice jersey. Not every year has to be a super slam dunk home run. So it's okay. They're good.
Okay.
They're fine,
Okay.
and they're gonna sell. I know that much. They're gonna sell quite a bit of them because people want the latest jerseys.
People still buy jerseys, man. It's crazy.
Yes, they do. But what's the worst jersey they've come up with recently? Was it the gold one?
How recently are we going? I think that the gold one after the bubble year, that was horrible.
And I like that one too. You see, yeah.
Well, they looked like the Indiana Pacers, which I didn't. I was like,
I
now you just look like the Pacers. According to
Home
our
strong
Locked On
is still
Heat
the
poll, 83% of our audience says no, they would not buy the new Heat City Edition jersey, that they are not purchasing it. And I made this point to you before we started recording, David, but like I still see more Vice jerseys in the arena. Heck, I still see more like blackout or whiteout jerseys in the Heat arena than I did Heat culture jerseys last year.
I disagree. I think that's your personal favoritism leaning towards what pops out. Yeah, a little bit. I think a little bit there. I think
there is one difference in the jersey though. Can I just point it out before we
yes.
No number on the front, or is that just are we assuming that there's no number on the front? Last year we
Well,
had
it's
a
a
number
leak
on the
anyway,
front.
right? It's just a leak, so it might not be the final product.
Yeah, I'm not sure. But last year's Heat Culture jersey, the black one, had a red number on the front. What I don't like about this is if there is no number on the front, it just looks like a practice jersey. And I'm sure there's a number on the back, but it just feels like it could be anybody's jersey, that there's just a bin of them as you get into the practice court and you grab them like it's flag football.
Well, with a team that's always injured anyway, it makes sense for everybody to be going through a redshirt season. So it's perfectly in line.
You know what? That's actually a great joke. The red shirt jersey, the red shirt season, because everybody's gonna be hurt. I think this is lazy.
Oh,
I think the jersey's lazy. I understand Heat culture and wanting to basically trademark that and continue building that brand and that messaging. I get it. I get what they did at the court last year. I get it.
yeah. It's a message, though, a whole theme. Can I put something out to our listeners? If everybody out there is involved somehow, peripherally or just as a hobby in the world of graphic design, and want to submit a different version, not just of a culture jersey, but just like of a different version of a Heat jersey that they think would be a winner, I'm curious to see if anybody's willing to do that. If they want to email us or send it to us via Twitter or something like that, they can always reach us on email at lockedonheat@gmail.com, and we'll get those messages. And I'm curious because, we've talked to the people on the business ops side. Like, they've been on the show, they listen to this show, and they're tirelessly working, and they're always very much like Tony Stark and Iron Man. There's a vision of the future and their implementation of it on a day-to-day basis. And of course, there's the consistency of the front office and everything else like that. But if enough people, and it seems like fans generally seem to not appreciate these jerseys as much, like, why isn't there like a vision for what's next? Why isn't there like some grand scheme for something that's going to be, if not Vice, but something that has that same story and can captivate an international market the way those jerseys did? Because that was such a phenomenon, and I think it's kind of hard. It's a
tough standard to live up to.
Yeah.
And just one point of information here too. I keep interrupting you about the stupid number on the front. None of the City Edition jersey photos that we've seen have a number on the front, but some of them clearly have a space for the number. I think there's going to be a number on the front, but Nike just hasn't released them. Or the idea is that because Nike has some say in how the City Edition jerseys are rolled out, maybe none of them have numbers on the front this year. I don't know. Yeah. I'm assuming there's gonna be a number on the front. Look, it's not a bad. My favorite regular jersey is just the red Heat jersey. I want to know how this red compares, because this red was. Remember, we talked with people in business ops, and they talked about how the red on the black Heat culture jersey, the red number, was a little bit different of a shade of red than their normal red. I'd be interested to see how this red compares to the normal red.
Right.
Because I love the normal red. I think it's one of the best reds in sports. Maybe I'm a little biased there, and maybe nobody pays attention to that. I do. I think it's a great red. This looks like, from these photos, that it's a little bit brighter, that it looks like the one that was in the Heat culture numbers last year. So we'll see what happens. As much as I'm unimpressed by this Heat culture jersey, I think all the City Edition jerseys this year suck. I don't think, outside of the Toronto Raptors that basically did a throwback, and the Utah Jazz that basically did a throwback to their jerseys that were actually better before, and they actually screwed them up. And now their current jerseys look more like City Edition jerseys. They're just sort of plain Jane, kind of modern, whatever. As unimpressed as you may be, as anybody might be about the Heat City Edition jerseys this year, here's the Boston Celtics.
Ugh.
Awful. It's so bad. What is this?
That looks like a marathon jersey. Like you're running a marathon runner jersey. You know what I'm saying? Like, is there a nipple guard underneath there somewhere so you don't get a chafing? We don't want Jason Tatum complaining about chafed nipples. That's for sure.
There's nothing. I don't know what the story is. Like, I'm sure some like branding person will be like, well, the way that neon green thing is angled is reminiscent of like the Boston Tea Party, and the way that their arm angle when they threw the tea into the bay or whatever. Like, I don't even know.
There's actually 11 swooshes on the jersey to symbolize Bill Russell's 11 championships or something like that. I don't know. Like, if you tilt the jersey at exactly a 33-degree angle, you'll see Larry Bird's face somewhere on the jersey or something like that.
Boston media is going to talk this up, that this jersey is going to win Defensive Player of the Year.
The jersey itself, not anybody in it. The jersey. That's what stops people. Like the idea that the pinstripes are always what helps the New York Yankees. Well, it's the Boston jersey that always makes the difference defensively.
Thanks for making Locked On Heat your first listen every day. Like, comment, and subscribe on YouTube. Follow us on your favorite podcast app.